Hi and welcome. This time I want to introduce you to the quantum synthesizer. Well, it's going to be a short introduction because there are too many features to show in just one video, so I try to keep it short. And the second reason is because I just own it for 3 days, so I also don't know every feature yet, but I try to cover as much as possible in this video. Okay, let's start with a very simple sequencer sound. Yeah, you've got a sequencer. Of course, you've got also an arpeggiator, but you've got a sequencer, and it's very easy to use. You click on Performance, you select Sequencer, and you can already see the sequencer here. When you click on Record, you can play the steps you need. Stop record. And there is your sequence. So you've got a normal sequencer, but you've got also a parameter sequencer. So there are really a lot of modulation sources in the quantum synthesizer. You've got 6 LFOs in total, 3 on the panel, 3 more in the menus. You've got 6 envelope generators, 3 on the panel again and 3 in the menus. You've got a komplex modulator, which is some kind of complex LFO. Maybe I'm going to show you this thing. So you can draw a curve in here up to 32 steps. You can draw the line with your finger. You can draw a second line. Sorry. And now you can blend between the 2 lines you've drawn. And it's a normal LFO, so you can also configure the speed. And you have another parameter, which is some kind of pulse width modulation. And this is really a lot for one single LFO. So I think the complex modulator is really something if you want to create vivid sounds and complex sounds. And while I say vivid, you see a static wave here, but you can turn up the entropy and now it's moving. So it's simulating some kind of maybe analog behavior, maybe human behavior. You can imagine if you have an LFO and you want to simulate a vibrato, a human would not keep the vibrato speed at the very same level. And this is exactly what this entropy parameter makes here. It changes the speed very slightly to make it more vivid. Okay, so a lot of modulation sources, of course a lot of modulation destinations, and you've got a modulation matrix here with up to 40 modulation slots, but you can modulate something with a source, but you can also modulate the intensity of the modulation directly within the modulation slot. For instance, if you want to make a vibrato with LFO1 on the pitch, and you want to control the intensity by the modulation wheel, you choose a modulation slot, like this one. As a source, you select LFO1. As a destination, you select the pitch. Now you can select the amount. And because we want to control it with the modulation wheel, you can select the controller here, wheel, and the control amount. Okay, and now you see two sources in this modulation slot, LFO1 and controller is wheel. Okay, let's hear more sounds. It's just a simple sampling sound I prepared. You can see here that oscillator 1 is in particle mode, but within the particle mode you can select between pure sample player and granular synthesis, which I'm going to show you later. Okay, pure sample player. As you can see here, there is one sample loaded to oscillator 1. But, and this is interesting, you can load more than just one sample into the oscillator. By clicking on Actions and Add, you see a folder browser. And here you have recordings, which are the recordings of the quantum. You can record the internal sound, so you can make resampling of your patch and record that, or you can record through the audio input. And then your recordings are going to be here, but you can also select samples. You can load in samples with a SD card, but there are already samples included when you get your quantum. For instance, these ones here. You can pre-listen to them before you load them in. And when you select one sample and click on Add, then this one selected sample is going to be loaded into oscillator 1. But if you select the folder and no sample and click on Add, then all samples within this folder are going to be loaded into oscillator 1. So it's easy to load in a complete file list into oscillator 1. And then there are going to be multiple samples within this list here, and you can create a multi-sample set for this oscillator by selecting a sample and choosing the key range for this particular sample and also the velocity range. So you can make a multi-sample set with different samples for different key ranges and at the same time different samples for different velocity ranges. So I would call the Quantum a 100% sampler, but with more features also. Okay, I already mentioned the granular synthesis. I prepared an additional sound for you here. I turn off the effects. This repeating sound or delay sound is not created by a delay effect, as you can see it here. It's not created with the LFOs. It's also not created with the loopable envelope generators. And it's not within the sample. We can listen to the sample here by choosing the one oscillator with the particle mode and turning off the granular mode. So this is the sample. And this is what happens. So in granular mode, you have this. And these nervous guys here are grains. It's hard to explain what grains are. They are some kind of voices, or maybe you can imagine it like the playheads of a tape player. So when you imagine this is the tape, and you are going to see lines which are moving on this. And every red line is a play bar. So, and they are moving because I turned on the jitter, which again makes the sound more vivid. And you have a lot of parameters here for the grains. You can select the attack phase, the decay, and even the polyphony. With increasing polyphony, the sound gets more noisy. The length, the gate length, and the position. The travel parameter says how fast the grains are moving through the sample and in which direction. Now it's moving backwards. But of course you can also let it move forward. So very interesting feature. Okay, let's go to the next oscillator mode, which I prepared here. It's the Resonator. maybe it doesn't sound very interesting, but you have to remember this is not a sampler here, but you can also load in samples and change the characteristic of this sample by routing it through the Resonator. I think the Resonator is a very, very good tool to form or to shape the attack phase of a sound. So you can program a normal sound and putting the Resonator on top of that to make the attack phase more interesting. Okay. What's next? Oh yeah. The fourth mode of the oscillators is the Waveform Mode. I think it's a good moment to show you the characteristic of the analog filter. Again, there's no effect here. It's just one oscillator and the analog filter. But why is this sound so fat? The reason for this is because I increased the number of oscillators within one oscillator. For the waveform mode, you can set up the number of oscillators up to 8. So it's simulating up to 8 oscillators, and you can detune them, of course. You've got the normal waveforms like sawtooth, sine, triangle, square, pink noise, and so on. The interesting thing is that you can morph between multiple waveforms with this knob here. Don't know how to show you. So let's take a look on the filters. So we have a dual analog filter, which is something in between 1 and 2, because you've got 2 analog filters in parallel mode. So you cannot choose them to be in sequence. They're all the time in parallel mode, of course. And you can select between 12 dB and 24 dB types, and also you can select whether they are routed through an distortion or saturation circuit or not. So let's hear some resonance, I think. And there are different modes to combine the two filters, like twin peaks, which is interesting for vocal sounds. Okay, one thing I want to show you is here in the Granular Synthesis. Because there's also one interesting parameter. Maybe you noticed that the grains are spread in the stereo panorama. The point is, here within the oscillator you can select how much the spreading is. But does it make sense? Because normally the oscillators are routed through the analog filters, and the filters are mono and not stereo. So how is it possible to keep the stereo signal of the oscillators? And there's one trick. Here in the routing, you can decide whether the digital former is in front of the analog filters or behind the analog filters, and then you can route the oscillators directly to the digital former. So here I'm avoiding this mono circuit, keeping the signal stereo. Okay, what's in digital former? Digital former is something which it's some kind of wave shaper and filter. So you can select different types here. Bypass, of course. You can add a drive to the signal. You can increase the gain of the signal. You have a comp filter. Also negative. You've got a bit crusher. Where you can change the bit depth and the sampling rate. And you've got multiple digital filters. So you've got Nave, Largo types for low pass, high pass, 24 and 12, of course, notch filter and band pass. And you've got the PPG digital filter from the PPG software of Waldorf. So if you missed the high pass, you can create a high pass with your digital former. Of course, also self-resonating. Okay, so I think one part I can show you too is the wavetable oscillators. So I turn off the effects. Here, this parameter chooses the wavetable. Here you can choose the position within the wavetable, but with the newest firmware you can scroll through the wavetable with your fingers. You can set the brilliance, which adds aliasing to your wavetable. This parameter spectrum is from the Nave synthesizer. Changing the characteristic of the wavetable, and you can select in which way this wavetable is scanned. So the smooth selection here says that there is an interpolation. The stepped is the normal scanning, but you can also say that some steps are ignored, so just every 8th step is used for the scanning. And you can also change the characteristic with the mode parameter. You can select normal or harsh or dirty. Okay. I think as the last part, I can show you the effects. Here you have 5 effect slots, and you can select phaser, chorus, flanger, delay, reverb, EQ, drive, and compressor. So with an EQ, you can shape the characteristic of your sound very detailed. And of course you can also select a delay with a lot of different modes, synchronized and not synchronized, in stereo or not, and the delay can be very long, up to 2 seconds. And of course you can select multiple delays or not. No, you cannot. Seems that it's not possible. Okay. So I think that's it. Thanks for watching and have a nice day.